The divorce papers were already signed when my husband finally asked me the question he should have asked 3 months earlier. What did the doctor say? I looked at Daniel across the kitchen table. For the first time in 27 years of marriage, I saw real fear in his eyes. Not guilt, not sadness, fear. I placed the envelope between us. Nothing, I said. His face went pale, and that was when I understood something terrifying. My husband already knew what was inside the envelope. He just didn't know that I had read it. I was 58 years old when Daniel asked me for a divorce. His name was Daniel Carter, and for most of my adult life, I had believed I knew him better than anyone else in the world. I knew how he liked his coffee. I knew he hated sleeping with the bedroom window open. I knew that whenever he was nervous, he rubbed the edge of his wedding ring with his thumb. But 6 months before he asked me to leave, he stopped wearing that ring. At first, I pretended not to notice. That had always been my weakness. I was very good at pretending not to notice things that hurt. Daniel and I had built an ordinary life together, a small house outside Chicago, 2 children, a mortgage that was almost paid off, Sunday dinners, arguments about money, Christmas decorations we kept in the basement for years because neither of us wanted to admit we were too tired to put them away. Our daughter, Emily, was 31 and lived in another state. Our son, Matthew, was 28 and had recently started a business that was always about to become profitable. Daniel believed in Matthew too much. I protected Emily too much. And somehow, both of us had spent years confusing protection with love. The first sign that something was wrong with me came on a Tuesday morning. I was standing in the kitchen when the coffee mug slipped from my hand. It didn't break. I caught it against the counter, but my fingers had suddenly become weak. Daniel was sitting at the table, reading the news on his phone. He looked up. "You okay?" "Fine." I smiled. That was another weakness of mine. I always said fine before I knew whether it was true. For the next few weeks, the exhaustion got worse. I stopped cooking complicated meals. I began sitting down while folding laundry. Sometimes I would walk into a room and forget why I was there. Once, I stood in the grocery store for almost 5 minutes holding a carton of milk, unable to remember whether we already had milk at home. When I told Daniel, he laughed. "Claire, you're 58. You're allowed to forget milk." I laughed too, but something inside me didn't, because deep down I knew this wasn't normal. And apparently Daniel knew it too. The morning of my first appointment, he was standing in the hallway holding my coat. "Where are you going?" he asked. I looked at him. "To the doctor." His hand tightened around the coat. "Which doctor?" I stared at him. "You know which one." For half a second, something crossed his face. Then it disappeared. "Right," he said quickly. "Of course." That was the first time I wondered what Daniel knew that I didn't. The tests began with blood work, then more blood work, then scans. The nurses became strangely gentle. Doctors started using phrases like, "We need to investigate further." Nobody said anything directly, but sometimes people tell you the truth with the way they avoid saying it. Daniel was supposed to come with me to the next appointment, he promised. "I'll be there," he said. "You better be." He smiled. I wouldn't miss it. But 2 hours before the appointment, my phone buzzed. Something came up at work. "I'm sorry." I stared at the message for a long time. Something came up. Daniel had used those words for 27 years. They had covered late meetings, missed birthdays, broken promises, and now, apparently, they covered the moment when I might find out whether something was seriously wrong with me. I went alone. Dr. Harris sat across from me with a folder in front of her. She was a calm woman in her 40s, the kind of doctor who never rushed. That was what frightened me. "Claire," she said, "we received some of the results." I looked at the folder. "What does that mean?" She folded her hands. "We need to talk about treatment." My fingers went cold. "What kind of treatment?" She took a breath, and in that moment, I knew my life was about to change. But before she could answer, my phone vibrated. A message from Daniel. "How did it go?" I stared at the screen. The question was simple. but I suddenly wondered why he hadn't asked me in person, and why, for the first time in our marriage, I was afraid to tell my husband the truth. That evening, I found a receipt in Daniel's coat pocket, a restaurant, an expensive one, dinner for two. The date was the previous Wednesday. I remembered that night. I had been home alone. Daniel had told me he was working late. I waited until he came home. Then I placed the receipt on the kitchen counter. "What's this?" Daniel looked at it. For 1 second, he didn't move. Then he picked it up. "Business dinner. With who?" "Someone from work." "Who?" His jaw tightened. There it was. That tiny movement. The one I had learned to recognize after 27 years of marriage. A lie was coming. "Why are you interrogating me?" I stared at him. "I asked who you had dinner with." He took off his coat. "I'm tired, Claire." He had never said my name like that before. Not like a name, like an accusation. That night, I lay beside him in the dark. At 2:17 in the morning, his phone lit up. I wasn't trying to look. I swear I wasn't. But the message appeared on the screen. "I can't keep waiting for you." The sender was saved as Mara. I knew no Mara. Daniel woke up. His hand moved quickly. He turned the phone face down. Neither of us spoke. And that was when I realized that the woman in the message was not waiting for him to call. She was waiting for him to make a decision. The next morning, Daniel asked me to sit down. He had made coffee. That was how I knew something terrible was coming. Daniel only made coffee when he wanted to soften a blow. He sat across from me. His hands were folded. His wedding ring was missing. "I think we need to talk about us." I almost smiled. That is never a good opening. He looked at the table. "I don't think I can do this anymore." My body went completely still. Do what? Be married. The room remained perfectly quiet. The refrigerator hummed. The clock ticked. Outside, a truck passed our house, and my husband asked me for a divorce as if he were canceling a subscription. "I've met someone," he said. I didn't ask who. I already knew. Mara. His eyes lifted. That was confirmation enough. "She understands me," he said. I stared at him. "Do I not?" Daniel said nothing. And that silence hurt more than the confession. Because an affair could be a mistake. But silence was a decision. He had already hired an attorney. The papers were ready. He wanted to sell the house, divide the savings, make everything civil. That word made something inside me burn. Civil. As if 27 years could be divided like furniture. As if our children were witnesses to a business transaction. As if I had not spent half my life beside him. I looked at the papers, then at Daniel. "You want a divorce?" "Yes." "Then get one." He stared at me. "You're not going to fight?" I almost laughed. No. But the truth was, I had no idea what I was fighting for anymore. 3 days later, I returned to Dr. Harris. This time, I went alone. Daniel had promised to come. Then, 2 hours before the appointment, he canceled again. "I'm sorry. I can't make it." I put the phone away. When Dr. Harris entered the room, she was holding the same folder. "Claire," she said gently, "we received the complete results." I sat down. "What is it?" She didn't answer immediately, and that pause told me everything. "You have a serious autoimmune condition." I stared at her. She continued speaking. "There were treatments, there were medications, there were risks, but the condition was treatable. My long-term outlook was uncertain, but there were options." I heard the words. I understood them. But one thought kept repeating in my mind. Daniel wasn't there. The man who had promised to stand beside me in sickness and in health had chosen not to sit beside me when the doctor told me I was sick. I left the office with a folder in my purse and a secret in my chest. I did not tell Daniel. Not yet. I wanted to know whether he would come back because he loved me or because he felt sorry for me. But that evening, I discovered something that changed everything. Daniel had known about my diagnosis before I did. His desk had always been off limits, not because we had secrets, because he was possessive about paperwork. Daniel kept tax returns from 1998. He labeled folders. He saved receipts. He remembered every financial detail of our lives. That evening, I was looking for a copy of our mortgage documents. I opened the wrong drawer. Inside was a folder. The label read, Claire, Medical. My heart stopped. I opened it. There were copies of my test results, appointment dates, notes from my doctor. And then I saw a handwritten page, Daniel's handwriting. At the top, he had written, "What she doesn't know." I read the first line, then the second. By the third, I couldn't breathe. Daniel had known about my diagnosis for weeks before I did, but the final sentence made my hands begin to shake. If Claire finds out, she will never forgive me. I sat down on the floor, the medical papers scattered around me, and suddenly, the divorce no longer looked like an affair. It looked like a plan my husband had made before I even knew I was sick. Then my phone rang. The screen showed an unknown number. I answered. A woman's voice whispered, "Is this Claire?" "Yes. My name is Mara." I gripped the edge of the desk. "I know who you are." There was silence. Then she said, "Then you need to meet me." "Why?" "Because Daniel isn't telling you the truth." I looked down at the medical file scattered across the floor. About the divorce? No. About my diagnosis? The woman on the other end stopped breathing for a moment. Then she whispered, "Especially about that." And before I could ask what she meant, the line went dead. I stared at the phone, then at Daniel's handwritten note, and for the first time, I wondered whether my husband had asked for a divorce because he no longer loved me or because he knew exactly how much time I had left. Mer, not the Ambaruks. Mara's voice was still in my head long after the call ended, especially about your diagnosis. I stood beside Daniel's desk, staring at the medical folder scattered across the floor. For 27 years, I had believed that the worst thing a husband could do was fall in love with another woman. I had been wrong. The worst thing was discovering that your husband had been making decisions about your life while you were still trying to understand what was happening to your own body. I barely slept that night. At 6:12 in the morning, Daniel came home. I heard the front door open. His footsteps stopped when he saw me sitting at the kitchen table. The folder was in front of me. He didn't ask what it was. That was the first thing I noticed. He already knew. "Where were you?" I asked. He removed his coat slowly. "Out. With Mara?" His eyes lifted. "Yes." I felt something tighten in my chest. Not jealousy. Something colder. "Did she tell you she called me?" Daniel froze. For the first time since he had asked for a divorce, he looked genuinely afraid. "What did she say?" I almost smiled. "That's interesting." "What?" "You didn't ask what I said. You asked what she said." He looked away, and suddenly I knew the woman named Mara was not the only person keeping secrets. I agreed to meet her the next afternoon. We chose a coffee shop 20 minutes from my house. I didn't tell Daniel. Maybe that was childish. Maybe it was the first secret I had ever kept from my husband. But when someone spends months lying to you, the truth starts feeling like something you have to steal. Mara was sitting near the window when I arrived. She was not what I expected. I had imagined someone confident, beautiful, the kind of woman who walked into a room and knew exactly what she wanted. Mara looked exhausted. She wore a gray coat. Her hands trembled slightly around a coffee cup. When she saw me, she stood. The answer came so quickly that it almost knocked the air out of me. "How long?" 8 months. I nodded slowly. "Does he love you?" She looked toward the window. "I don't know." That answer made me angry. "You don't know?" "I think he believes he does." I leaned forward. "And what do you believe?" Mara's eyes filled with tears. "I believe Daniel is terrified." I almost laughed. "My husband asked me for a divorce." "I know. He's having an affair." "I know. He wants to sell our house." "I know." "Then what exactly is he terrified of?" Mara looked at me. "You." My anger disappeared. "What?" "Not you as a person." She lowered her voice. "What your illness might do to you." For several seconds, I said nothing. Then I pulled the medical folder from my bag. "You knew about this?" Mara stared at the papers. "Yes." How? Daniel told me. When? 3 months ago. My fingers tightened around the folder. 3 months. That was before my diagnosis had been officially explained to me, before I had even known what the doctors suspected. What did he tell you? Mara hesitated. He said you were very sick. How sick? She looked down. He said the doctors were afraid you might not have much time. The coffee shop seemed to become silent. I stared at her. That's not what my doctor said. Mara's face changed. What? My condition is serious, but it's treatable. She went pale. Daniel told me you were dying. The words sat between us. And suddenly the entire story changed. I wanted to believe Daniel had simply misunderstood the doctors. That was the first lie I told myself. Maybe he had panicked. Maybe he had heard the word serious and imagined the worst. Maybe he had convinced himself that I was dying because fear was easier than reality. But then Mara placed an envelope on the table. I need you to see this. I didn't touch it. What is it? Messages from Daniel. Why? Because I think you deserve to know what he told me. I opened the envelope. Inside were printed screenshots. The first message was dated 3 months earlier. I don't know how to tell her. The next. She thinks she has time. Then, I can't watch her become a patient. My hands began shaking. And then I saw the message that made my stomach turn. If I leave now, she will hate me. But if I stay, I will have to watch her die. I looked at Mara. Why would he write this? Because he wanted me to understand. Understand what? That he was leaving you because he believed he couldn't survive watching you get sick. I stared at her. Then I remembered the divorce papers, the urgency, the way Daniel had refused to come to my appointment, the way he had looked at me whenever I mentioned treatment. For the first time, I wondered if I had misunderstood the entire affair. Maybe Mara wasn't the reason he wanted a divorce. Maybe she was the person he had chosen to help him escape. But then I noticed something. One message was missing. The messages jumped from one date to another. I looked at Mara. Where is the rest? She didn't answer. Mara? Her hands began to shake. There is something else. What? She looked at me. I have cancer. I stared at her. The words were unexpected. I'm sorry. She smiled bitterly. Don't be. When? 3 years ago. Are you in treatment? No. Are you sick now? No. She took a breath. I'm in remission. I stared at her, and suddenly I understood why Daniel had chosen her. She knew what illness felt like. She knew what fear felt like. She knew what it was like to sit in a hospital and wonder whether your life was about to change. But that still didn't explain the messages, or the divorce, or why Daniel had lied about my prognosis. Then Mara said something that made my blood run cold. Daniel asked me to lie to you. About what? She looked down. He wanted me to tell you I was pregnant. I stared at her. What? He said if you believed I was pregnant, you would hate him. I pushed back from the table. You agreed? Mara's eyes filled with tears. I was desperate. For what? She didn't answer, and that silence told me there was another secret. I returned home before Daniel. I wanted to see whether he would tell me the truth without knowing what I had learned. He walked through the door at 7:43 p.m. His face looked tired. Then he saw me sitting at the kitchen table. Claire. I placed the printed messages in front of him. He stopped. His eyes dropped to the papers. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. Then he sat down. You met her. Yes. Why? Because you wouldn't tell me the truth. Daniel closed his eyes. I pointed to the messages. You told Mara I was dying. I thought you were. My doctor says my condition is treatable. I know. I stared at him. You know? He looked at me. And there it was. The moment when a marriage stops being a marriage. When the person across from you stops being someone you trust and becomes someone you need to investigate. How long have you known? Since before your appointment. Why didn't you tell me? Daniel looked down. I was afraid. Of what? He didn't answer. I stood. Did you ask Mara to lie about being pregnant? His face went pale. Yes. Why? I needed you to hate me. I laughed. It was an ugly sound. You needed me to hate you? I thought it would be easier. For who? For you. I stepped closer. You cheated on me to protect me? No. Then what? Daniel's eyes filled with tears. I couldn't do it. Do what? Watch you get sick. I stared at him. Then you should have held my hand. He looked away. I didn't know how. No. My voice became quieter. You knew exactly how. He looked at me. You chose not to. Daniel began to cry. I had seen him cry only twice in 27 years, when his father died, and when our son was born. Now he cried because I was standing in front of him, still alive, still angry, and no longer willing to let him decide what happened to me. But I still didn't understand one thing. If Daniel truly believed I was dying, why had he been so desperate to finalize the divorce? Why had he been asking about the house? Why had he been checking our financial accounts? And why had he written in the medical folder, "If Claire finds out, she will never forgive me"? I looked at him. Daniel. He wiped his face. What? What else did you do? He went completely still. And in that moment, I knew. The affair was not the biggest secret in our marriage. The diagnosis was not the biggest secret either. There was something else. Something Daniel had done long before Mara entered his life. Something connected to our money, our house, and the future he had been trying desperately to protect. He lowered his eyes and finally whispered, "I was trying to save Matthew." My heart stopped. What does our son have to do with this? Daniel said nothing. I took one step toward him. Daniel. He looked up, and the answer on his face was worse than anything he could have said, because suddenly I understood. My husband had not only been hiding an affair, he had not only been hiding my diagnosis, he had been hiding something from our son. And whatever it was, it had already cost us far more than our marriage. Always trying to save Matthew. Daniel's words hung in the kitchen. I stared at him. What did he do? Daniel looked down at his hands, and for the first time in 27 years, I saw something I had never seen in him before. Shame. Not guilt. Shame. There was a business, he said. Matthew's business? Daniel nodded. He borrowed money. How much? He didn't answer. Daniel. More than he could repay. I sat down slowly. How much? He finally looked at me. Almost everything we had. The room became completely silent. I thought about our retirement account, the savings we had built over decades, the money we planned to use when we were older, the house, the future. What do you mean, everything we had? Daniel rubbed his face. Matthew's business failed. I stared at him. Matthew told us it was struggling. It was worse than struggling. How much did he lose? Daniel looked away. Enough to destroy him. I stood up. And you gave him our savings? I was trying to help him. You stole our retirement money. I was going to replace it. With what? He said nothing. That was the answer. I felt something inside me break. Not because Matthew had failed. People fail. Businesses fail. Children make terrible decisions. But Daniel had looked at me every day for 2 years and said nothing. He had watched me plan our future while knowing there might not be one. Then I remembered something. The house, the divorce, the urgency, the life insurance. I turned toward him. What does my diagnosis have to do with the money? Daniel closed his eyes, and suddenly I knew. He had discovered my life insurance policy. It was not a secret policy. It was something we had purchased years earlier when the children were young, but I had forgotten about it. Daniel had not. When the business collapsed, he began looking for ways to replace the money he had taken. He borrowed against the house. He sold investments. He took loans. And then he saw the insurance policy. If I died, the money would pay off the debts. I stared at him. Were you waiting for me to die? No. The answer came too quickly. Then why did you ask for a divorce? Daniel's face twisted. I thought you were dying. And you thought divorcing me would protect you from the debt? No. Then what? He looked at the floor. I thought if we divorced, I could sell the house. I could separate your assets from the debt. I could protect what was left for you. I laughed bitterly. Protect me? I thought you might not have much time. You knew my condition was treatable. I didn't know that at first, but you knew before you asked for the divorce. He didn't answer. I stepped closer. You knew, yes. Then why? Daniel's eyes filled with tears. Because by then, everything was already falling apart. There it was, the truth. He had not made one terrible decision. He had made hundreds of small ones. One lie, one secret, one hidden account, one affair, one manipulated story, one divorce request. Each decision had seemed temporary. Each decision had been made to fix the previous one. And by the time he realized he was drowning, he had pulled everyone else underwater with him. Matthew arrived that evening. He stood in the doorway. He looked at his father, then at me. He already knew. That was the final betrayal. You knew? I asked. Matthew lowered his head. Yes. My chest tightened. How long? Almost a year. I closed my eyes. For a moment, I couldn't speak. My son had known that his father was destroying our future to save him, and he had said nothing. I was going to fix it, Matthew whispered. I looked at him. That's what your father said, his eyes filled with tears. I was scared. So was I. He looked at me. I didn't know what to do. You could have told the truth. Matthew nodded. I know. That was his weakness. He had been so afraid of being seen as a failure that he allowed his father to become a criminal. Daniel had been so afraid of losing his son that he destroyed his marriage. And I had been so afraid of losing my family that I had ignored every warning sign. We had all believed we were protecting someone. In reality, we were protecting ourselves from the consequences of the truth. The divorce became final 6 weeks later. Daniel signed the papers. This time, he did not ask me to stay. Mara ended her relationship with him. Later, I learned that Daniel had been paying some of her medical expenses. She had agreed to lie about the pregnancy because she was afraid of losing access to treatment. Her weakness had been fear. Mine had been silence. Daniel's had been cowardice. Matthew's had been pride. None of us were innocent, but none of us were monsters either. That was what made it so difficult. Sometimes the people who destroy your life are not evil. Sometimes they are frightened people making selfish decisions. And sometimes that is even harder to forgive. I began treatment. The first few months were difficult. There were days when I could barely get out of bed. There were days when I hated my own body. But slowly, things improved. The medication worked. The fatigue became manageable. And eventually, I began to feel like myself again. The strange thing was that while my body was healing, my life was falling apart. But maybe it needed to. Maybe some things had to collapse before you could finally see what they had been built on. 1 year after the divorce, I saw Daniel at the hospital. He was sitting alone. I almost walked past him. Then I noticed the bracelet on his wrist, the one I had given him on our 20th anniversary. He still wore it. Why are you here? I asked. He looked up. Matthew. Our son had finally confessed everything to the company. He lost his business. He faced criminal charges. The money was gone. The house was sold. The retirement account was nearly empty. Daniel had lost almost everything he had tried to protect. But Matthew was alive, and for the first time, he was taking responsibility for his own life. Daniel looked older. I used to think losing you would be the worst thing that could happen to me, he said. I said nothing. He looked at the floor. Now I think the worst thing was having you and still choosing to lose you. I looked at him. Do you regret the divorce? His eyes lifted. Every day. I took a breath. Do you regret the affair? Yes. Do you regret lying about my diagnosis? His eyes filled with tears. Yes. I nodded. Then he asked the question I had expected for months. Do you ever think about coming back? I looked at the man I had loved for 27 years, the man who had betrayed me, the man who had been afraid, the man who had tried to save everyone except himself. Yes, I said. His expression changed. But not because I want you back. He looked away. I know. I think about what we were. He nodded. We were real. Yes, even the good parts, especially the good parts. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then I said, "But real doesn't always mean forever." Daniel closed his eyes, and this time he didn't argue. A few weeks later, I received my latest medical results. Dr. Harris smiled. "Your treatment is working very well." I looked at the report. The prognosis was good. I had a future, a real one. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to imagine it. A smaller apartment, new friends, travel, maybe love again, maybe not. I no longer needed to know. That was the difference. Daniel had once believed my diagnosis was the end of my life. He had divorced me because he thought I was dying. He had betrayed me because he was afraid. He had destroyed our family trying to control a future that had never existed. But I survived. Not just the illness, the marriage, the betrayal, the lies. The version of myself that had spent 27 years believing that keeping a family together was more important than telling the truth. One evening, I stood by my apartment window and watched the sun disappear over the city. My phone was silent. Nobody needed anything from me. Nobody was waiting for me to fix a problem. Nobody was asking me to forgive them. For the first time in my life, I was alone, and I was not afraid, because the truth was, my husband had asked for a divorce, believing he was preparing for my death. Instead, he gave me something he never intended to give me, a life of my own. And perhaps that was the final irony. The man who thought he was leaving me because I was too weak to survive was the very reason I finally discovered how strong I had become. You can love someone and still refuse to return to them. You can understand why someone betrayed you without excusing what they did. And sometimes, the person who thinks they are preparing you for the end of your life accidentally gives you the courage to begin a completely new one. Because surviving is not always about defeating an illness. Sometimes, survival means finally choosing yourself after years of letting everyone else choose for you. What would you have done if you were Claire? Would you have forgiven Daniel after learning that fear, not another woman, was the reason behind his actions? Or would the lies, the money, and the betrayal have destroyed the marriage forever? Share your opinion in the comments. Opinion in the comments. Opinion in the comments. Opinion in the comments.